we are talking about the architecture of, well, international financial architecture. Therefore, in mind, we have the architects. So what did the architect have in mind when they provided us with the architecture we have to deal with? They must have had their own interests. They must have framed things the way they wanted to benefit themselves, or maybe we can assume that they wanted to benefit the whole world. Now, we are here discussing the situation as it is, where we find there are enormous resources in this world, but inequitably distributed. So Africa has to look at itself and look at the whole world as it's set up. And we know in this world, people, countries, work for interests, their own interests. Africa's interests and the countries of our continent interests must be taken care of, beginning with ourselves. So, and we talk about speaking with one voice many times. It has to be one voice. It has also to be loud and clear and effective. For that to happen, we think about working together. We think about representation. And representation is not also just numbers. It's being able to speak out loudly and representing ourselves rather than having other people represent us. So it starts from what has been talked about, that is very important, when it was in the speech of His Excellency President Ruto and His Excellency Musa Faki. Therefore, the reforms we are talking about is how do we disrupt, if you will, the current architecture as we have it, so that it includes significantly and visibly the interests of our continent. Our continent, whether it is human resources or natural resources or any resources we are thinking about, how can anyone interested in the well-being of the people of this world sideline our continent? In actual fact, if you look at the facts as they are, in a few decades, the only place in this world that will be having a growing middle class is Africa, the only one. So it is even in the interests of the rest of the world that has marginalized Africa to contribute to the well-being of our continent, because the growth of Africa, based on this middle class, feeds into the growth of the rest of the world. So they should even be accepting some of these proposals in self-interest, because Africa grows, the whole world grows. But Africa cannot wait to be handed this opportunity by anybody else. We therefore must be on the front line, really fighting for this right, and therefore for ourselves, but also which contributes to the well-being of the rest of the world.
President Kagame, I want to be a little bit provocative here. I've been coming to Kenya for probably 30 years. And there are places that I used to know that I no longer recognize. Why? Because the city's architects have changed the landscape. Now, most of the Bretton Woods institutions were created 60 to 80 years ago at a different time from the one that we live in. So, if we're going to talk about reform, it's not just the access to resources. It's looking at those institutions that were created back then and asking the question, are they still relevant to the needs of today? What is your thought about redesigning a lot of these institutions to make them fit for purpose?
Well, absolutely. It's a no-brainer that what worked 50 years ago or designed 50 years ago, things have changed, and therefore a rethink of a new design that fits the purpose must be into play. There's no question about it. But here what we are talking about is not simply an argument of whether, this is fit for purpose or this. I think everybody understands that point. But there are philosophies, if you will, or interests or that operate behind that. For us in Africa, we are hard-pressed to see that there is a change of these and in the design of these institutions. But maybe the way the institutions are set up, benefiting some parts of the world, those in those parts of the world are not interested in having the change happen because it gives them control, it gives them say over other people's resources even. So it's not that people don't understand. Especially for Africa, we understand it better because of how we are affected. But the other parts of the world that have the power and control, it's also not because they don't understand, but it is because that it serves them very well, benefits them, that they are not interested or they are slow in allowing change to happen. So it's not a very complicated thing to understand. Everybody understands that. What is complicated is to reach this understanding and compromise that we don't lose anything by having everybody benefit as we should benefit, all of us. That's where the issue lies. And therefore, the reforms are based on this thinking. We are only looking for the pathways to having the reforms implemented that provide us with less costs than having to fight so much over what is obvious that actually benefits all of us, as I said.
What must Africa do to ensure that it strengthens its voice and it is able to engage in ongoing conversations on reforming the global financial architecture? What is it that we need to do on a consistent basis? So this isn't just a one-off conversation. What are the things that we need to do in the global space?
We must walk the talk because we have discussed these issues for many years, as I can remember, and we are saying the right things. So we must start doing the right things that we know how. One is being together. We must, as I said, the unit of our continent through the African Union and other institutions, including this bank that invited us here, the African Development Bank. It's all about Africa. First of all, we must have it in our mind. And therefore, there is a need for mindset change from the past to the present. And we cannot be served well in our intentions for the future if we are not thinking correctly, acting correctly right now. So when we have been talking about the African Union reforms, as His Excellency President Ruto, my brother, mentioned earlier, you know, before I handed over to the president, I had been carrying out these tasks. I mean, there is no secret here, I just say it as it is. We agreed many things. Most of the countries were represented in the room, heads of state and government. We have agreed many things that need to be done because it is right and it is the only thing that can deliver what we want. Few years later, 2 years maybe from the time we decided, we have discussions in Addis at the African Union headquarters. You find some of the, 50% of the things we agreed have changed. And you're asking the same leaders in the room, you say, what happened? What we are saying now that we must be doing is what we agreed 2 years ago. Why have we not done exactly what we agreed? And nobody gives an answer. So we cannot escape this. We cannot escape doing the very things we have agreed to do because we know that is what is going to deliver what we want for our continent. There is no other way I can put it. There is no magic wand that is in anybody's hand to bring the change that we want. So when we are here discussing and everybody is listening and we are listening to ourselves, we must get out of this room with a commitment, a conviction that we can actually deliver what the continent wants, and we are the ones to do that. The rest will continue to be discussions back and forth, speeches back and forth, but we will not get the results. But some progress has been made. It is a slow progress. Even then we are saying we can't afford to move slowly. It's urgent. It's long overdue. So that's what we need to be working on as we move forward. And that's I will try to be very brief. I think very good points have been made by the Prime Minister of Namibia. But I want to thank the African Development Bank's president and his team who have done a very good job of mobilizing resources for our continent and also leveraging those resources to broaden the investments as we need them on our continent. And I would only, with the support of everyone on our continent, we would urge him to even mobilize more resources, especially the private sector resources to be invested on our continent, because other sources are not enough in and of themselves. We have seen, for example, the time of COVID and towards the end, when the SDRs that were mobilized, we had 5% of that, of the 650 billion that was, so 5% of that for the whole continent of Africa is very small. So whichever sources we have, alone they are not enough. We need to diversify, therefore, the sources of the money that we need to invest on our continent. And I think that helps development of Africa to realize the agenda that is set for the 2063. And therefore, I thank all the leaders of our continent so that we continue to work together to support Africa Development Bank institution.